I think of Noam Chomsky as the American Socrates, a relentless oppositionist and questioner in the public square from the start of the Vietnam War. The poison hemlock is always on offer for Professor Chomsky, but somehow he survives. At MIT from 1955, Chomsky was a pioneer in the science of language. He is unretired now at the University of Arizona in Tucson. He signed the Harper's Letter in support of open forums of ideas. It was an obvious, painless statement, he thought, about the lifeblood of liberal society. His big anxieties in 2020 run in other directions.
The Harper's Letter was a completely anodyne statement saying that it's a mistake to join the right wing by imposing things like banning talks, breaking up talks, setting up an environment in which people are afraid to say things and so on.
But why did you sign it? What was your concern in signing that letter?
It's a mistake for segments of the left to join in the right-wing establishment practice of silencing opinion you don't like.
I get it.
It's a very minor part of it, but it's wrong to do it. One of the consequences of this letter, which was interesting, was a stream of letters I'm getting from mostly young left academics describing to me their own experiences in having to walk on tiptoe on eggshells because of the toxic atmosphere that's been created. It's very small as compared with what the mainstream establishment does, but it shouldn't happen in principle. And it's a gift to the right, of course. They love it. In fact, Trump right now is building his whole campaign around it with totally wild claims, but enough people have had experiences so that there's some shreds of credibility assigned. And there should be no reaction because it's an obvious, simple point. The reaction shows that it's a much more serious issue than I thought. But it's a minor issue. I mean, there's lots of things we should be talking about, not an outbreak of irrationality in some segments of the intellectual classes.
Oh, well, let's talk about them. One of the books you and Ed Herman wrote, famous book, was called Manufacturing Consent, in which you argued basically that the big media has the job of building consensus around the social system, including capitalism, and war from time to time. Where do you see that job, that assignment, being carried out today in old media, in new media, in the general conversation?
If you look at the New York Times yesterday, there's a major article warning that of the danger that China might be violating U.S. sanctions by making a deal with Iran. And that's deeply concerning to us. All right, let's ask how an independent press would handle this question. The U.S. tore up an international agreement that was working very well with regard to Iranian nuclear weapons. The U.S. completely tore it up. The U.S. then imposed harsh sanctions on Iran, which have no status or validity whatsoever, except that the U.S. announced them. And now we're complaining about the fact that somebody is ignoring an outrageous demand that we made. It's fine. We have no right to block anyone else. We have no right to threaten Europe that we're going to toss them out of the international financial system if they go ahead with the agreement that they accepted and prefer. None of this has any justification whatsoever, but it's taken as the norm by the press. I should say that many people have misunderstood the book Manufacturing Consent. Many people have assumed that what we were saying is you can't trust the media. But we don't say that at all. We defended the media, the reporters, the correspondents. They do a great job. You can trust them. You've got to read them. First thing I do in the morning is read the New York Times, because that's the main source of news. But you have to read it with an understanding of the framework within which their choice of news is accepted and how it's framed. You have to compensate that, even though it's still the best source of news.
So much of the Times and big media in general has positioned itself at war with Donald Trump. He may feed on the criticism and the daily attacks, but how do you score that contest?
The Times and Trump,
Yeah.
well, they despise him. They're very critical of him. Well, why shouldn't they be? This will sound outrageous, but it's an obvious truth. So let me make an outrageous, obviously true statement.
Please.
He is the most dangerous human being in history. Okay. His climate policies are very clearly and explicitly directed to ending the prospects for human life on Earth in an organized human society in a very short term. Do I have to go through the details? You know the details. So the outrageous statement is true. Okay?
There's a lesson in your life, Noam Chomsky, of how to be influential even when you're blocked, even when you're dismissed.
I'm not complaining. I have plenty of avenues. The people who I'm speaking for are people who don't have a voice. This happens to people all over the place. The left, people on the left, it's a common experience. I happen to be lucky. I can use other avenues of expression. Most people can't.
Is there a lesson that others can apply there?
The lesson is to keep working to break down the culture of control and domination.
Noam, you've been at it a long time. How is this moment, 2020, different? You've spoken of the threat of Donald Trump himself against the environment, against survival. How else?
How else? This is the most unique moment in human history. We're at a moment of a confluence of four major catastrophes. One of them is the pandemic. There's three others. Go back to January. Every January, the famous doomsday clock is set with the minute hand, a certain number of minutes to midnight, depending on an assessment of the global situation. Ever since Trump has been in office, the minute hand has been moved closer to midnight. 2 years ago, it reached the closest point to midnight it had ever reached. This last January, the analysts gave up on minutes. They turned to seconds, 100 seconds to midnight. They gave three reasons. One of them is the growing environmental catastrophe. Another one is the growing threat of nuclear war. The third crisis is the sharp deterioration of democracy. Why does that belong there? Because it's only through a vibrant, functioning democracy of an informed, engaged electorate that we can hope to deal with the first two crises. What's happened in the months since January? Donald Trump has made each of these crises much worse. That's a considerable achievement. He's made the pandemic worse. He's made the environmental crisis worse. He's made the nuclear threat much worse by continuing his project of dismantling the entire arms control regime. He's now even calling for breaking the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty by carrying out nuclear tests. Can you tell me how this is being covered? No. What I'm called on by the media is to come and talk about a little trivial thing, the irrationality of intellectuals on an anodyne letter, but not these things.
People feel this danger in their bones. Noam Chomsky, what is a citizen to do? March, maybe.
We have all possibilities open to us. It's not a fascist state. You can do lots of things without danger. I mean, it's a real scandal that the nuclear issue is barely discussed. Okay, you can bring it up. It's been done before. In the early 1980s, there was a huge anti-nuclear movement. It's part of the background that led Reagan to agree with Gorbachev on the INF Treaty. Could be developed again. On the environmental issue, it's kind of a scandal, but our generation yours and mine, are sitting back while young people are in the forefront of trying to do something about it. At the Davos meetings, they have to ask Greta Thunberg to make a statement. 16-year-old kid. Okay. How about us? What about the destruction of democracy? The executive branch has been almost totally purified. There's nobody left in it except cowardly sycophants who repeat whatever Trump says. Congress had, the Republican Congress, incidentally, had imposed inspectors general to monitor executive offices. They were starting to probe into the fetid swamp that Trump has created in Washington. So what did he do? Fired them all. Next, the federal attorney in the Southern District of New York, the most important one in the country, that's the Wall Street area, started to look into the same fetid swamp, Trump's massive corruption that he's introduced. So what did Trump do? Fired him, put in some flunky who's in favor of giving everything away to private equity corporations. That's what's happening to democracy before our eyes. We have a raging pandemic. Trump is making it much worse than any other country. Maybe Brazil is a competitor where they're run by a Trump clone trying to imitate him. It will end the pandemic somehow. We're not going to end the melting of the polar ice sheets. Another 4 years of Trump, we might reach irreversible tipping points. Now, we don't have a lot of time. These are the things that should be drilled into people's heads every minute.
Noam Chomsky, let me ask. I mean, since the murder of George Floyd by a policeman in Minneapolis, there has in fact been a real churning in the streets, in popular thinking and action. One piece of it is the toppling of statues, not just Confederate generals, but all sorts of people, including some of the founders who were slave owners, held to be objectionable for that reason. I mean, how do you feel watching this stuff?
This is the greatest popular movement in American history. Black Lives Matter and the protests in the street.
Okay.
Furthermore, it has enormous popular support. Polls are running like 2/3 support. That's way beyond what Martin Luther King had, even when he was popular.
Right.
He lost his popularity when he stopped just attacking racist Alabama sheriffs and started going to the North and condemning the Vietnam War, trying to organize a poor people's movement, black and white. At that point, he became harshly criticized by the liberal elite, and he ended up very unpopular. Okay, that was the wrong thing to do. But even when he was popular, he didn't have the popularity of this movement. So it's a remarkable movement. It's going after important issues. It's even moving to the point of asking about the institutional bases of the tragedy of the Afro-American population, which has lived 400 years of first the most vicious slavery in human history, nothing like the slave regimes in the past. Then after 10 years of freedom, relative freedom, a revival of that system. This went on almost to the Second World War. Then comes a brief period of freedom, except that federal law, for example, prevented blacks from joining in home purchasing. It was into the late 60s. Federal regulations blocked blacks, so they lost out on that. Then goes on and on. There's a bitter, cruel legacy of 400 years. Now people are beginning to face it. It's a great thing. They're also beginning to face the genocidal assault on the native population. This is a tremendous increase in popular consciousness. Of course, the right wing hates it and vilifies it, but it's a very important development. Well, let's turn to the minor thing, the statues. You have to be careful about it. I think there's a big distinction between a statue of Robert E. Lee and a statue of Thomas Jefferson.
Interesting.
Furthermore, you have to ask yourself, what's the right way of dealing with the statues? Some of them, I think, really are so egregious that they should be just put away somewhere. But for some of them, you should use it as an educational opportunity.
Yes.
The statue of Thomas Jefferson should have on it his famous quote saying something like, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and his mercy will not last forever, meaning we will be punished for the hideous crimes of slavery. That should be put there so people know what was going on. They should know that the founders were almost entirely slave owners. A lot of them thought slavery was horrible, like Jefferson, but they accepted it. Maybe they hoped it would go away someday, but they accepted it. We should know these things.
We're getting to know these things as a matter of popular understanding and conversation as never before in my lifetime, Noam Chomsky. It is a very, very fascinating and exciting thing. I would hope that we can take it, we can learn it.
That's what the discussion should be about, not about some fashionable issue of an innocuous statement, which we should even talk about because it's so obvious. So yes, we should be talking about these things.
Lots more conversations ahead. Noam Chomsky, you've given us so many over the years and would love to do it again. Be well and thank you.
Okay, good to talk to you.
So that's what a chronic dissenter sounds like in his 92nd year of life. He's accessible, plain-spoken, happy to have a free mind and voice. He's never canceled anybody, and it turned out there was no way to cancel Noam Chomsky. Thanks again to Tressie, McMillan, Cottam, and David Bromwich. We had lots of help this week from Max Larkin, Maggie Doherty, Stephanie Burt, Moira Weigel, and Adam Fitzgerald. You can hear interviews that we couldn't fit into this hour with Matt Taibbi, P. Carl, and Kimani Gibson, all on our website at